The bullet that grazed Sarah Mitchell's shoulder in the summer of 1878 was meant for the bank clerk cowering behind the counter. But fate had other plans that scorching afternoon in Tombstone, Arizona territory. She had walked into the First National Bank at precisely the wrong moment, and as the outlaws scattered like startled crows, she collapsed against the marble floor, her pale blue dress blooming crimson. The gunfire faded into the distance, replaced by the thundering of hooves and the screaming of bystanders, but Sarah's world had narrowed to the searing pain in her shoulder, and the strange sense of peace that came with knowing she had survived worse than this. A shadow fell across her face, blocking out the harsh desert sun streaming through the bank's tall windows. Strong hands lifted her with surprising gentleness, and she found herself staring into the most striking gray eyes she had ever seen. The man carrying her had a weathered face that spoke of long days under the relentless Arizona sun, a strong jaw dusted with stubble, and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His cowboy hat had fallen to the ground in his haste to reach her, and something about the genuine concern in his expression made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with blood loss. "Stay with me now," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to anchor her to consciousness. "Doctor's place is just down the street. You're going to be just fine." Sarah wanted to tell him she had endured far worse, that this bullet wound was nothing compared to the gutting loss she had survived 2 years ago, when her husband and infant daughter had succumbed to scarlet fever within days of each other. She wanted to explain that she had learned to live with an emptiness so profound, it made physical pain seem almost welcome. But the words would not come, and instead she let herself be carried through the dusty streets of Tombstone, cradled against this stranger's chest as if she were something precious. Dr. Emmett Hollies worked quickly, his experienced fingers probing the wound while Sarah bit down on a leather strap to keep from crying out. The cowboy who had carried her refused to leave, standing in the corner of the examination room with his arms crossed, watching the proceedings with an intensity that made the doctor glance at him several times. "She your wife?" Hollies asked as he cleaned the wound with carbolic acid. "No, sir," the cowboy replied, "just happened to be close by when she fell." "Well, she's lucky you were. Another few minutes and she might have bled out on that bank floor." The doctor threaded his needle with practiced efficiency. "This is going to hurt, miss. Try to hold still." Sarah closed her eyes as the needle pierced her skin, but she felt the cowboy move closer. When she opened her eyes again, he was standing beside the examination table, and without a word, he reached out and took her free hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, and she gripped it with surprising strength as the doctor continued his work. "What's your name?" she managed to ask through gritted teeth. "Jack Thornton," he said, his thumb moving in small circles against the back of her hand. "I run cattle up near the Dragoon Mountains, came into town for supplies." "Sarah Mitchell," she whispered. "I run the dress shop on Allen Street." "I know it," Jack said, and something in his voice suggested he had noticed her before, perhaps walking past her shop window or attending church on Sundays. "You do fine work. My sister bought a dress from you last spring for her wedding." The doctor tied off the last stitch and stepped back to survey his handiwork. "You will have a scar, but you will heal clean if you keep it dry and change the bandages twice daily. No lifting anything heavy for at least 3 weeks, you understand?" Sarah nodded, suddenly aware that Jack was still holding her hand. She should pull away, should thank him politely and send him on his way, but she found herself reluctant to break the connection. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with such care, so long since she had felt anything beyond the numbing routine of her daily existence. "Where do you live, Miss Mitchell?" Jack asked as the doctor began cleaning his instruments. "I will see you home safely." "That is not necessary," Sarah protested, though the room tilted slightly when she tried to sit up. "I can manage." "No, ma'am, you cannot." Jack's voice was gentle but firm. You just took a bullet, let me help you. In the end, Sarah was too weak to argue. Jack supported her weight as they made their way down Allen Street, past the Crystal Palace Saloon and the OK Corral, where horses stamped and snorted in the afternoon heat. Sarah's dress shop occupied the ground floor of a two-story building, with her living quarters situated directly above. Jack helped her up the narrow staircase, his arm solid around her waist, and when they reached her small but tidy apartment, he eased her onto the settee by the window. "You got family here?" he asked, glancing around at the sparse furnishings. The apartment was clean but impersonal, as if Sarah had never quite committed to making it a home. "No," she said quietly. "My husband and daughter died 2 years ago, scarlet fever. I came here from Kansas to start over." Something flickered across Jack's face, an understanding that went deeper than mere sympathy. "I am sorry for your loss," he said, and she believed him. "You should not be alone tonight. Is there a friend I can fetch, someone to sit with you?" Sarah thought of the other shopkeepers on Allen Street, the women from church who had tried to draw her into their social circles. She had kept them all at a careful distance, too afraid of forming connections that could be ripped away. "There is Mrs. Henderson at the general store," she said finally. "She checks on me sometimes." Jack nodded and settled his hat back on his head. "I will go get her, but first, let me make you some tea." Before Sarah could protest, he had moved into her small kitchen and was stoking the fire in the stove with the ease of a man accustomed to taking care of himself. She watched him work, fascinated by the efficient way he moved through her space, finding the kettle and tea leaves without needing to ask. When he brought her the steaming cup 10 minutes later, she accepted it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "You did not have to do all this." Jack crouched beside the settee so they were at eye level. "Yes, I did," he said simply. "Now drink your tea while I go get Mrs. Henderson. I will be back to check on you tomorrow if that is acceptable." Sarah found herself nodding before she could think better of it. That would be acceptable. True to his word, Jack returned the following afternoon with a basket of supplies: fresh bread from the bakery, eggs, a jar of honey, and a bottle of laudanum in case the pain became too severe. Mrs. Henderson had spent the night and assured him that Sarah's fever had remained low, a good sign that infection had not set in. But when Jack climbed the stairs to Sarah's apartment, he found her trying to change her own bandages, her face pale with pain and frustration. "Here now," he said, setting down the basket and moving to her side. "Let me help with that." "I can do it myself," Sarah insisted, but her trembling fingers told a different story. "I know you can," Jack said patiently, "but you do not have to." Something in his tone made her relent, and she sat still while he carefully unwrapped the soiled bandages. His touch was sure but gentle as he cleaned the wound with the carbolic acid the doctor had provided, and Sarah found herself studying his profile as he worked. He had a strong nose and a mouth that looked like it smiled often, though there was a sadness in his eyes that matched her own. "You lost someone too," she said suddenly, surprising herself with her boldness. Jack's hand stilled for a moment. "My wife," he said quietly, 3 years ago. She was thrown from a horse while she was carrying our first child, lost them both. I am so sorry." Sarah's voice cracked with genuine emotion. "The pain never quite leaves, does it?" "No," Jack agreed, wrapping fresh bandages around her shoulder with careful precision. "But it changes. Becomes something you carry instead of something that crushes you." They sat in silence for a long moment after he finished, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows and painting everything gold. Sarah could hear the sounds of Tombstone drifting up from the street below. The rattle of wagon wheels, the lowing of cattle being driven to the stockyards, the tinny music from the saloon pianos. It was the sound of life continuing, indifferent to individual suffering, and somehow that was both comforting and unbearably sad. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Sarah asked finally. "You do not know me." Jack met her eyes with startling directness. "Maybe I want to," he said. "If that is all right with you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to feel anything beyond grief and numbness. The prospect of opening her heart again terrified her, but there was something about Jack Thornton that made her want to try. "I think that would be all right," she whispered. Over the following weeks, Jack became a constant presence in Sarah's life. He visited every afternoon, bringing supplies and checking on her healing shoulder. He fixed the loose floorboard in her kitchen and replaced the cracked pane of glass in her bedroom window. He sat with her while she sewed, telling her stories about his ranch and the men who worked for him, painting pictures of a life she had never imagined for herself. Sarah found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. She began to notice small things: the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the deep timbre of his laugh, the calloused strength of his hands. She caught herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what he was doing, whether he thought of her as often as she thought of him. 6 weeks after the shooting, Dr. Hollies declared Sarah healed and cleared her to resume her normal activities. That evening, Jack arrived at her door with a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked from the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains. They were simple blooms, purple lupine and golden poppies, but Sarah accepted them as if they were the rarest roses. "Would you have dinner with me?" Jack asked, turning his hat in his hands with uncharacteristic nervousness. "There is a new restaurant that opened on Fremont Street, supposed to have the best steak in the territory." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. This was more than friendly concern, more than one lonely soul helping another. This was the beginning of something real, something that could grow into the kind of love she had thought she would never feel again. "I would like that very much," she said. The restaurant was small but elegant, with white tablecloths and candles flickering in glass holders. Jack pulled out Sarah's chair with old-fashioned courtesy, and when they were seated across from each other, she saw her own nervous hope reflected in his eyes. They ordered steak and potatoes, but Sarah barely tasted her food, too caught up in the conversation flowing between them. They talked about everything and nothing: childhoods in different states, favorite books, dreams for the future. Jack told her about his plans to expand his ranch, to breed horses as well as cattle. Sarah confessed that she had always wanted to travel, to see the ocean and the great cities back east. As the evening wore on and the candles burned low, Sarah felt something inside her unfurl like a flower that had been too long in darkness. When Jack walked her home that night, the streets of Tombstone were quiet beneath a sky brilliant with stars. He stopped at the bottom of her staircase and turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Sarah," he began, then paused as if gathering his courage. "I know it has not been long, but I need you to know how I feel. These past weeks with you have been the happiest I have had since Eliza died. You make me want to believe in second chances, in the possibility of building something good from the ruins of grief. I am falling in love with you, and I need to know if you might feel the same." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but for once they were not tears of sorrow. "I do feel the same," she whispered. "But Jack, there is something you need to know, something that might change how you feel." Jack reached out and took both her hands in his. "Tell me." Sarah drew a shaky breath, her courage nearly failing her. This was the moment she had been dreading, the truth that had ended every tentative connection she had tried to make since moving to Tombstone. "When my daughter was born, there were complications, terrible bleeding that would not stop. The doctor said I could never have children again. I am barren, Jack. If you are looking for a wife who can give you sons and daughters, I cannot be that woman." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Sarah waited for Jack to pull his hands away, to make excuses and retreat into the night. Instead, he stepped closer and lifted one hand to cup her face with infinite tenderness. Then he leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, his lips warm against her skin. "Then we will love what we have," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "I do not need children to make my life complete, Sarah. I need you. If you will have me, if you will trust me with your heart, that will be enough, more than enough." Sarah felt something break open inside her, all the walls she had built around her heart crumbling in an instant. She threw her arms around Jack's neck and held him tight, breathing in the scent of leather and sage that clung to his clothes. He wrapped his arms around her waist and held her just as fiercely, and they stood that way for a long moment, two wounded souls finding healing in each other's embrace. "I will have you," Sarah whispered against his shoulder. "I will trust you. I love you, Jack Thornton." "I love you too," Jack said, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "Will you marry me, Sarah? Will you come live with me at the ranch and build a life together?" "Yes," Sarah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Jack kissed her then, a real kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened into something that spoke of passion and promise and desperate hope. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, and Sarah felt more alive than she had in years. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church on 3rd Street, with half of Tombstone in attendance. Sarah wore a dress she had made herself, pale blue silk with pearl buttons down the back, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers like the ones Jack had brought to her door. Jack wore his best suit and a new black hat, and when he said his vows, his voice was strong and sure. Mrs. Henderson cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. The cowboys from Jack's ranch whooped and hollered when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Jack kissed Sarah with such enthusiasm that the congregation erupted in laughter and applause. The celebration continued at the ranch, where Jack's men had set up tables in the yard and roasted a whole steer. There was music and dancing, and Sarah found herself passed from partner to partner as the cowboys took turns spinning her around the makeshift dance floor. But her eyes kept finding Jack across the crowd, and the look he gave her in return promised that the real celebration would come later, when they were finally alone. The ranch house was smaller than Sarah had expected but sturdy and well-built, with thick adobe walls and a wide porch that overlooked the valley. Jack carried her over the threshold as tradition demanded, and Sarah laughed as he set her down in the main room. It was sparsely furnished with pieces that were clearly handmade but solid. A large table and chairs, a stone fireplace, a comfortable-looking couch covered in Navajo blankets. "It is not much," Jack said, watching her take it all in. "But I thought maybe you could help me make it feel more like a home." Sarah turned to him with shining eyes. "It already feels like home," she said, "because you are here." Jack pulled her close and kissed her again, slower this time, savoring every moment. When he swept her into his arms and carried her toward the bedroom, Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with anticipation. It had been so long since she had been intimate with anyone, so long since she had allowed herself to be vulnerable in this way. But Jack was patient and tender, taking his time to learn what made her sigh and tremble. He whispered words of love and praise against her skin, and when they finally came together, it felt like a homecoming, like finding a piece of herself she had thought lost forever. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, and Sarah rested her head on Jack's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Are you happy?" Jack murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," Sarah admitted. "Sometimes I am afraid I will wake up and discover this is all a dream." Jack pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "It is not a dream," he promised. "This is real and I am not going anywhere." Sarah settled more deeply into his embrace, finally allowing herself to believe him. As sleep pulled her under, she thought about how strange life was, how a random bullet on a summer afternoon could lead to this moment of perfect peace. The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Sarah had been living alone for so long that sharing space with another person felt foreign at first. But Jack was easy to live with, quick to help with household tasks, and considerate about giving her time to work on her sewing projects. She had decided to keep her dress shop in town, traveling into Tombstone 3 days a week to meet with clients and work on orders. Jack never complained about her absences, understanding that her work gave her a sense of purpose and independence. In turn, Sarah learned the rhythms of ranch life. She rose with Jack before dawn to make breakfast for the cowboys, thick slabs of bacon and eggs and fresh biscuits slathered with butter and honey. She learned to ride a horse, though her first attempts were clumsy and resulted in more than one undignified tumble into the dust. Jack was a patient teacher, steadying her in the saddle and encouraging her until she gained confidence. The ranch hands treated her with respect and affection, accepting her as their boss's wife without reservation. There was Miguel, the foreman, a weathered man in his 50s who had worked for Jack since the beginning. There was young Tommy, barely 19, who blushed whenever Sarah spoke to him directly. There was Samuel, a former slave who had come west seeking a new life and whose quiet dignity reminded Sarah of her own father. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah found herself settling into a contentment she had never quite achieved in her first marriage. She had loved her first husband, but theirs had been a practical union, two young people following the expected path. What she felt for Jack was deeper and wilder, a passion that took her breath away and a companionship that fed her soul. They talked for hours in the evenings after the work was done, sharing their thoughts and dreams and fears. Jack told her about his childhood in Texas, about his father's death in the war and his mother's struggle to keep the family farm. Sarah told him about growing up in Kansas, about her younger brother who had died of cholera and her mother's descent into melancholy. They also talked about the children they would never have, acknowledging the grief that came with that loss while finding ways to channel their nurturing instincts elsewhere. Sarah began teaching reading and arithmetic to the younger cowboys on Sunday afternoons, setting up a makeshift schoolroom in the ranch house parlor. Jack took on Tommy as an apprentice of sorts, teaching him everything about running a ranch and treating him like the son he would never father. One crisp November morning, Sarah woke to find Jack already dressed and standing by the window. There was a tension in his shoulders that immediately put her on alert. "What is wrong?" she asked, sitting up in bed. Jack turned and she saw worry etched in the lines of his face. "Miguel just rode in from the south pasture. We have got trouble. Rustlers hit us last night, ran off about 30 head of cattle." Sarah's heart sank. She knew how much those cattle meant to the ranch's survival, how carefully Jack had built his herd over the years. "What are you going to do?" "Go after them," Jack said grimly. "The tracks are fresh. If we move fast, we might catch them before they cross into Mexico." Fear clutched at Sarah's chest. "Jack, that is dangerous. Those men will be armed." "I know," Jack said, crossing to the bed and taking her hands in his. "But I cannot let them steal our livelihood without a fight. I will be careful, I promise. Miguel and Samuel are coming with me. We will leave Tommy and the others to watch over the ranch and keep you safe." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to beg him not to go, but she understood the reality of their situation. Rustlers were a constant threat in the territory, and if word got out that Jack's ranch was an easy target, they would be hit again and again. "Come back to me," she whispered fiercely. "Do you hear me, Jack Thornton? You come back to me." Jack pulled her into a tight embrace. "I will," he promised. "I have too much to live for now to take foolish chances." Sarah helped him pack supplies for the journey, her hands steady even as her heart trembled with anxiety. She watched from the porch as Jack, Miguel, and Samuel rode out, their figures growing smaller against the vast landscape until they disappeared entirely. Then she went back inside and threw herself into work, baking bread and mending clothes and cleaning already clean rooms, anything to keep her mind from imagining all the terrible things that could happen. The next 3 days were the longest of Sarah's life. She barely slept, starting awake at every sound, hoping to hear the thunder of returning hooves. Tommy tried to distract her with stories and offers to teach her to shoot a rifle, but nothing could dispel the cold dread that had settled in her bones. She found herself praying constantly, bargaining with God to bring Jack home safely, promising anything in exchange for his safe return. On the fourth day, just as the sun was setting, Sarah heard what she had been waiting for, the sound of horses approaching. She ran out onto the porch, her heart in her throat, and felt tears of relief stream down her face when she saw 3 riders cresting the hill. Jack was in the lead, sitting tall in the saddle, alive and whole. Sarah did not wait for him to dismount. She ran down the porch steps and met him as he swung down from his horse, throwing herself into his arms with such force that he staggered backward. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "Did you get the cattle back?" Sarah finally asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Most of them," Jack said. "The rustlers were camped in a canyon about 40 miles south. We caught them by surprise. They scattered like cowards when they realized we had them surrounded." "No one was hurt," he added quickly, feeling Sarah tense in his arms. "We got off a few warning shots and they ran. Miguel is driving the cattle back now with a few of the boys." Sarah pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of injury. "You are sure you are all right?" "I am sure," Jack said, cupping her face in his hands. "But I have to tell you, Sarah, those 3 days away from you were hell. All I could think about was getting back here, back to you. Nothing else mattered." Sarah kissed him then, pouring all her relief and love and fear into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Jack's eyes had darkened with desire. "Come inside," Sarah whispered. "Let me show you how much I missed you." That night, their lovemaking had an edge of desperation to it, a need to reaffirm that they were both alive and together and safe. Afterward, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Jack made Sarah a promise. "I am hiring more hands," he said. "And I am going to talk to the other ranchers about forming a cooperative to deal with the rustling problem. I will not put you through that kind of worry again if I can help it." Sarah traced her fingers along the line of his jaw. "I know you will always have to deal with dangers," she said. "That is the reality of this life. But knowing you will try to be careful, that you will always fight to come back to me, that is enough." Winter came to the Arizona Territory, bringing cold nights and the occasional dusting of snow on the higher peaks. Sarah and Jack settled into a comfortable rhythm, working side by side to keep the ranch running smoothly. On Christmas Eve, they invited all the cowboys into the main house for a feast, and Sarah served roasted turkey and mashed potatoes, and apple pie made from fruit she had preserved back in autumn. As they sat around the fireplace later that evening, Miguel pulled out a battered guitar and began to play. The men sang songs in English and Spanish, their voices blending together in rough harmony. Sarah sat curled against Jack's side, his arm around her shoulders, and felt a profound sense of belonging. These men had become her family, this ranch her home in a way that transcended simple geography. When the last guest had stumbled off to the bunkhouse and Jack and Sarah were alone, he pulled a small wrapped package from his pocket. "I made something for you," he said, suddenly shy. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Sarah unwrapped the package carefully to reveal a wooden box, beautifully carved with intricate patterns of flowers and vines. When she opened it, she found it lined with soft velvet, perfect for storing her most precious sewing needles and thread. "Jack, it is beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "You made this yourself." "I have been working on it for months," Jack admitted. "Whenever I had a spare moment, I wanted to give you something that showed how much you mean to me." Sarah set the box aside carefully and threw her arms around his neck. "You show me that every day," she said. "In 1,000 small ways, but this is wonderful and I will treasure it always." Jack had a gift for her too, a delicate silver necklace with a small turquoise stone. He fastened it around her neck with gentle fingers, and Sarah touched it wonderingly, feeling the cool weight of the stone against her skin. "Now you carry a piece of this land with you always," Jack said. "A reminder that you belong here with me." They made love in front of the dying fire, taking their time, savoring each touch and kiss. Sarah felt cherished and desired and deeply loved, and when she fell asleep in Jack's arms, she dreamed of golden futures filled with joy. The new year brought changes to the ranch. True to his word, Jack hired 3 more hands and worked with the neighboring ranchers to organize regular patrols of the surrounding territory. The rustling problem did not disappear entirely, but the increased vigilance made their ranch a less appealing target. Sarah's dress shop continued to thrive, and she found herself taking on an apprentice, a young woman named Lily whose family had fallen on hard times. Teaching Lily the finer points of dressmaking gave Sarah a sense of purpose beyond her own work, and she took pride in watching her students' skills develop. In March, Sarah missed her monthly courses and felt a flutter of panic. She had been told in no uncertain terms that pregnancy was impossible for her, but her body was showing unmistakable signs. When she finally worked up the courage to visit Dr. Holly's, he confirmed her suspicions with a gentleness that suggested he understood what this meant. "I cannot explain it," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "Sometimes the body heals in ways we cannot predict. The damage from your first delivery must not have been as permanent as we thought. You are about 6 weeks along, I would estimate." Sarah walked out of the doctor's office in a daze, her mind reeling. This was impossible. This was a miracle. This was terrifying. She thought about the baby she had lost, the daughter who had lived only 3 days before succumbing to the fever that would claim her father as well. She thought about the possibility of going through that kind of loss again and felt her knees weaken. But underneath, the fear was something else. A fragile, tentative hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this was the second chance she and Jack deserved. She did not tell Jack immediately. She needed time to process the news herself, to decide how she felt about this unexpected development. But 3 days later, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, the words spilled out of her almost against her will. "Jack, I am pregnant." The silence that followed was so complete that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She forced herself to look at Jack and found him staring at her with an expression of stunned disbelief. "That is not possible," he said finally. "The doctor said—" "I know what he said," Sarah interrupted. "But I saw him again yesterday and he confirmed it. I am carrying your child, Jack. Due sometime in early October, he thinks." Jack stood abruptly and walked to the edge of the porch, his back to her. Sarah felt her heart sink. This was too much, she realized. After accepting that they would never have children, after building a life around that truth, this news was upending everything. "Jack, please say something," she whispered. When Jack turned around, Sarah was shocked to see tears streaming down his face. In 3 long strides, he was beside her, pulling her up from her chair and into a crushing embrace. "A baby," he choked out. "Sarah, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, her own tears starting to fall. "Or is this too frightening? Because I am terrified, Jack." "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose this baby too?" Jack pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Then we will face that together," he said fiercely. "But Sarah, we cannot live our lives in fear of what might happen. This is a gift, an incredible, impossible gift. Let us choose to be grateful for it, for however long we have it." Sarah nodded, feeling some of the tension leave her body. "You are right," she said. "We will be grateful, we will hope, and we will do everything we can to bring this baby safely into the world." The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah suffered from constant nausea in the early months, barely able to keep food down. Jack hovered anxiously, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, rubbing her back when the sickness overwhelmed her. Dr. Holly's prescribed bed rest, and Sarah was forced to temporarily close her dress shop, turning her clients over to Lily with instructions to send for her if there were any problems. As the weeks turned into months and Sarah's belly began to swell, the initial terror faded into cautious optimism. The baby moved constantly, strong kicks that made Sarah gasp and laugh. Jack would press his hand to her stomach at night, marveling at the life they had created together. "What should we name him?" Jack asked one evening as they lay in bed. "What makes you so sure it is a boy?" Sarah teased. Just a feeling, Jack said. Though a daughter would be just as welcome, I would love a little girl with your eyes and your stubborn spirit, Sarah smiled. If it is a boy, I want to name him William after my father, and if it is a girl, maybe Grace. William and Grace, Jack repeated, trying the names out. I like them both. Summer brought scorching heat that made Sarah's pregnancy even more uncomfortable. She spent most of her time indoors, sewing tiny clothes for the baby and trying to keep cool. Jack rigged up a canvas shade on the porch so she could sit outside in the evenings, and the Cowboys took turns bringing her treats from town, peppermint sticks and lemon drops and fresh peaches. In September, as Sarah entered her final month, Dr. Hollies moved into one of the spare rooms at the ranch. He wanted to be close in case the baby came early or there were complications. His presence was both reassuring and unnerving, a constant reminder of everything that could go wrong. Sarah went into labor on a cool October evening, just as the sun was setting. The pain started as a dull ache in her lower back and quickly intensified into waves that took her breath away. Jack helped her into the bedroom and sent one of the hands racing for Dr. Hollies, though the doctor appeared within minutes, already carrying his medical bag. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day, a grueling ordeal that tested Sarah's strength and resolve. Jack stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement even as she cursed him for putting her through this. Dr. Hollies remained calm and professional, checking her progress regularly and offering laudanum when the pain became too intense. Finally, as afternoon sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, Sarah felt an overwhelming urge to push. She bore down with all her strength, gripping Jack's hand so hard she was sure she must be breaking bones. There was a moment of searing pain, and then suddenly the pressure was gone and the room was filled with the sound of a baby crying. It is a boy, Dr. Hollies announced, holding up a squalling, red-faced infant. A healthy, strong boy. Sarah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure but filled with overwhelming joy. Jack was crying openly now, his face transformed with wonder as the doctor placed the baby in Sarah's arms. He was perfect. Impossibly, miraculously perfect. He had a shock of dark hair like his father and tiny fists that waved in the air as he cried. When Sarah guided him to her breast, he latched on immediately, and the room fell silent except for the soft sounds of nursing. "William," Sarah whispered, touching one finger to his impossibly soft cheek. "Welcome to the world, William Thornton." Jack leaned in to kiss Sarah's forehead, then William's. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving us this. I love you so much." "I love you too," Sarah said, unable to tear her eyes away from her son. "I was so afraid, but he is here and he is healthy and he is ours." The first weeks with William were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding. Sarah was exhausted but happier than she had ever been, marveling at every tiny expression that crossed her son's face. Jack was a devoted father, walking the floor with William when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, singing soft lullabies in the middle of the night. The Cowboys treated William like he was their collective nephew, taking turns peeking in at him and offering advice that ranged from helpful to absurd. Miguel carved him a wooden rattle, and Tommy purchased a tiny cowboy hat that would not fit him for years. Even Samuel, usually so reserved, could be found smiling down at the baby with undisguised affection. As William grew from a newborn into an infant, the ranch seemed to come alive with new energy. Sarah loved watching Jack with their son, seeing the gentle patience he showed as he taught William to grasp his finger, the pure joy on his face when William smiled for the first time. One evening, when William was about 4 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Sarah found Jack standing on the porch, looking out at the darkening sky. She slipped her arms around his waist from behind and rested her cheek against his back. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Jack covered her hands with his. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," he said. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I would spend the rest of my days going through the motions, never really living. And then you walked into that bank at exactly the right moment, and everything changed. Sarah moved around to stand in front of him, looking up into his face. That bullet was the best thing that ever happened to me, she said, because it brought you into my life. Jack smiled and pulled her close. When you told me you could not have children, I meant what I said. I would have been happy just loving you. But having William, having this family we have built together, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. Do you think we should try for another? Sarah asked, voicing a thought that had been growing in her mind. I know it is risky, and I know we should probably just be grateful for William, but you want more, Jack finished. So do I, if I am being honest. If you are willing to take the risk, then so am I. Sarah reached up to kiss him. Then let us take the risk, she said. Let us build the biggest, loudest, most chaotic family we can. Jack laughed and kissed her back, and they stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other and dreaming of the future. Over the next several years, their dreams came true in ways that exceeded their wildest hopes. Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Grace when William was 2, and then twin boys, James and Daniel, 2 years after that. The ranch house echoed with the sounds of children laughing and fighting and playing, and Sarah sometimes stood in the kitchen with flour on her hands and chaos swirling around her, feeling so full of love she thought she might burst. Jack expanded the ranch, buying more land and building a bigger house to accommodate their growing family. He taught William and Grace to ride almost as soon as they could walk, and the sight of his children on horseback filled him with pride. The twins were still young, but already showing signs of their father's love for the land and everything on it. Sarah reopened her dress shop, working part-time with Lily, who had become not just an employee but a dear friend. She found joy in balancing her work with her family, in being both a mother and a businesswoman. Jack supported her ambitions without question, taking over childcare duties when she needed to be in town, never suggesting that her place was only in the home. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jack surprised Sarah by closing down the ranch for the day and organizing a huge celebration. Friends and neighbors came from all over the territory, filling the house and yard with laughter and music. There was food enough to feed an army, and dancing that lasted until the stars came out. As the party wound down and the children were put to bed, Sarah and Jack slipped away to the porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. Sarah leaned against the railing, looking out at the land that had become so precious to her, and felt Jack's arms come around her from behind. "Happy anniversary," he murmured against her hair. "Happy anniversary," Sarah echoed. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" "Some days it feels like a lifetime," Jack said. "Other days it feels like we just met, but every day I wake up grateful that you are mine." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed. "After everything I lost, I thought joy was something that belonged to other people. But you taught me that it is possible to heal, possible to love again, possible to build something beautiful from broken pieces." Jack cupped her face in his hands. "We built it together," he said. "Every day, with every choice to trust and hope and love, even when it is scary. That is what makes it beautiful." Sarah pulled him down for a kiss, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into it. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling. "I have something to tell you," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "That depends on how you feel about baby number 5, Sarah said. Jack's eyes widened, and then he let out a whoop of joy that probably woke half the children in the house. He picked Sarah up and spun her around, both of them laughing like teenagers. "How are we going to manage 5 children?" Jack asked when he finally set her down, though his grin suggested he was not really worried. "The same way we have managed everything else," Sarah said. "Together, with love and patience and a healthy sense of humor." "Then we will be just fine," Jack said, kissing her again. The years continued to unfold in a tapestry of ordinary miracles and everyday joys. Baby number 5 turned out to be another daughter, Rose, who had Sarah's red hair and Jack's gray eyes. The children grew tall and strong, each developing their own personalities and dreams. William became a skilled horseman and eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. Grace inherited her mother's artistic eye and began designing clothes that were sought after throughout the territory. The twins were inseparable, always cooking up schemes that kept their parents on their toes. And Rose, the baby, was the sunshine of the family, able to charm her way out of any trouble. Through it all, Sarah and Jack remained devoted to each other. They weathered droughts and hard winters, economic downturns and personal losses. Miguel passed away when Rose was 5, and they mourned him deeply, burying him in a quiet spot overlooking the valley he had loved. Tommy eventually married Lily, Sarah's former apprentice, and built a house on the far edge of the ranch property. On Sarah's 50th birthday, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Her children were now adults, some with families of their own. William had married a rancher's daughter from up north, and they had given Sarah her first grandchildren, twin girls who were just as mischievous as their father and uncle had been. Grace was engaged to a lawyer from Tucson, and the wedding was planned for the following spring. As Sarah looked around at all the faces she loved, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life she had built with Jack, this family they had created together, was more than she ever could have imagined on that terrible day when a bullet had torn through her shoulder. She had thought that moment was the end of something, but it had actually been a beginning. Jack appeared at her elbow, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To you," he said, handing her one, "the most extraordinary woman I have ever known." Sarah clinked her glass against his. "To us," she corrected. "To the life we built together." They drank, and then Jack set down his glass and took her hand. "Dance with me," he said. Someone started playing a waltz on the piano, and Jack led Sarah out into the center of the room. As they began to move together, the years fell away, and Sarah was transported back to that first dance at the restaurant in Tombstone, when everything had been new and terrifying and full of possibility. "You ever regret it?" Jack asked softly. "Marrying me, coming to live out here, all of it?" Sarah looked up at him, this man who had saved her life in more ways than one. His hair was gray now, and there were deep lines carved into his face by decades of sun and wind. But his eyes were still the same striking gray that had captivated her that first day, and they still looked at her with the same love and devotion. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Jack Thornton. You and our children and this life we share, I would not change any of it." Jack pulled her closer, and they continued to dance as their family looked on. The music swelled, and Sarah closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of Jack's cologne mixed with the smell of horses and leather that would always mean home to her. When she had told him she was Barren all those years ago, she had been offering him an escape, a chance to find someone who could give him what she could not. But Jack had kissed her forehead and said those words that had changed everything. "Then we will love what we have." They had loved what they had, and in doing so, they had somehow received more than either of them had dreamed possible. 5 children, grandchildren on the way, a ranch that was thriving, and love that had only deepened with time. Sarah rested her head on Jack's shoulder and let herself be held, let herself be loved, let herself be happy. As the sun set over the Arizona landscape, they both loved, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Sarah thought about all the moments that had led to this one. The tragedy and heartbreak, the bullet that should have ended everything but instead began it, the courage to risk loving again when love had already hurt her so deeply. Life was unpredictable and often cruel, but it was also full of second chances and unexpected grace. Sarah had learned to trust in that grace, to believe that even in the darkest moments, there was the possibility of light breaking through. She pulled back slightly to look at Jack, and found him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip exactly the way it had when they first met. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Jack replied. "Always have, always will." They kissed there in front of their whole family, not caring who saw or what anyone thought. And as the music played on and their children cheered, Sarah felt complete in a way she had never expected to feel again. This was her life. Messy and beautiful, hard and joyful, filled with more love than she knew what to do with. This was her family, built not just from blood but from choice and commitment and the daily decision to keep showing up for each other. This was her home, this ranch in the Arizona territory where she had learned to ride horses and deliver calves and fire a rifle when the coyotes got too close. And this was her husband, the cowboy who had carried her bleeding body through the streets of Tombstone and somehow seen past her wounds to the woman she could become. The man who had loved her when she thought she was unlovable, who had wanted her even when she could offer him nothing but a barren future, who had built a life with her that exceeded every dream. As the party continued around them and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah held tight to Jack's hand and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey had been long and painful at times, but it had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this extraordinary life. And that, Sarah thought as Jack spun her one more time around the dance floor, was more than enough. It was everything.